We went from one little base to another, some manned by Popular Forces civilians, some manned by mercenaries from I don't know where. I thought it was terrible that the US armed some villagers against the NVAVA. That automatically made them enemies of a strong force that they could never defend against. The whole United States Army could not defend itself from concentrated enemy attacks. Why expect a few people with World War II weapons to defend their villages? From what I heard, when the VC were going to raid a village defended by Popular Forces, the VC told them that they would not kill them or their families if they surrendered. And the smart ones did surrender the villages. The problem was the special forces getting in the way, whom at times were killed before the battle started. Many guys thought that was terrible. I did not. One has to do what one has to do to save their village and families. The Americans were the problem, not the cure, just as the French were before. The whole war seemed to be unorganized, and when command decisions were made, they were made by officers from Saigon, just like the ones we were flying around. They really had no idea what it was like spending a month or even a night in the compounds that they were checking on. And some of those little places already had been wiped out with many killed. The Huey air crews talked about the tactics of the war constantly. I could think of no one who thought that what we were doing tactically was right. And I'm sure the people that these SF officers talked to told them that they needed thousands of more troops in their areas just to hold on. That's how things were in these areas between Cambodia and Saigon in 1968. And being air crews involved in all battles in the area, we knew how derelict the war was run. I was 19 years old but could see and experience what was going on by constantly flying combat missions. The infantry, due to being confined to the ground, had less of an overall view but knew that they seemed to be killed because of being thrown into areas where it was just a matter of time before they would be attacked by superior forces, either waiting for them or on their way to surround them. Keep in mind also that officers that never went out to the field where the war was being fought were given medals based upon how many casualties that their own battalion endured. If half a company of their own infantry were killed or wounded in battle, it proved that the senior officer that did not partake in the battle but ordered the maneuver on a map back in Saigon while smoking a cigar with a drink in his hand was doing his duty. He gets a medal. His boys were fighting and dying. This was a common practice. Most of the disorganization of the whole war, if not all of it, could be traced back to command decisions made by senior officers who never went out to the battlefield. Rank and medals were rewarded to senior command officers for their terrible ideas on how to kill their own troops in the most brutal ways. Keep landing them in hot LZs where they are outnumbered from the start. And if that doesn't work, keep their troopers out there until they make contact and are killed by an overwhelming enemy force. Army elites were working against their troops. Body counts worked both ways. The war of attrition was working against us. This all sounds crazy to the average person who was not familiar with the everyday battles between American and ARVN forces against the NVA-VC in the III Corps area of Vietnam in 1968. But it was a conclusion many of us made during the fighting there. Why send 60 troops into known heavy enemy strongholds? Sometimes half of them would die in minutes of landing, much like the Army landing on D-Day 1944 on Omaha Beach at Normandy during World War II. But this was done in smaller numbers and over again in Vietnam. There was no sane reason for this in my estimation except higher rank and medals for the senior command cowards back in Saigon or other safe places. Probably the last time Army generals and colonels were actually on the front line leading their troops into battle with swords raised was the American Civil War in the 1860s. Of course, many of them were killed on both sides, but their men respected them. They were brave. They were leaders. They knew the battle situation up front. Most frontline troopers in Vietnam looked on their senior commanders with contempt. They could see the cowardice. Unfortunately, by sending troopers into almost certain death situations, it went much deeper than pure cowardice. It was for the senior officers' own promotions, careers, and undeserved medals that their own troops died. Sounds like a hard indictment, but what is one to think about what one sees? I never saw an officer over the rank of lieutenant on my helicopter jumping out and into battle, never. But I can only relate what I saw and experienced in my time and in my area during combat operations. We did have a captain and a major flying in helicopters in our company. I did not know what was going on in other areas in Vietnam. I could only imagine. Well, our time was up visiting undefendable small camps out in the boonies. Undefendable if any more than 200 NVA-VC attacked at night, especially with a mortar attack to start the massacre of lower-ranking special forces and their compatriots. The captains and the major dare not stay in one of these camps even overnight. They might be killed. Heaven forbid. It has been a great day flying for our crew. I don't think anyone even shot at us. Back to Saigon, where the only battle was going on, would be a number 10,000 cheap Charlie GI was trying to talk a prostitute down in price for her services. Back to the hotel clubs and bars and nice quarters and good food for the officers. That's the Vietnam I know. The lower ranks of the army fight and die while the upper ranks party with booze and kept girlfriends or whores. They keep telling us in the army rank has its privileges. It certainly does. A party life or a bloody death in the mud, although once in a while a grenade is rolled into a bar, killing the drunken low-ranking GIs on an in-country Saigon leave. That is fairly rare. But Saigon is Saigon and anything can be expected.